rolling right on into the next session, which is titled Building for Scale, How Not to Get Caught Out at Global Launch. And I'd like to invite to the stage Teemu Haila from Metaplay.
I know it's late in the evening, but let's talk about scaling games and why that's hard. Couple of words first about myself, and who am I, why am I here? Let me actually roll back for a few. There we go. So first of all, Teemu, nice to meet you. Co-founder, chief product officer at Metaplay. But I've been in the industry for about 15 years, I think, at this point. Mostly as a game lead, game developer, later founder, all that. Some of the games that I've worked on that I can publicly talk about. But most importantly, mobile free-to-play all the way. I do a bunch of stuff in my free time on games communities, got a lifetime award from IGDA a couple of years back. But most importantly, for this talk, Metaplay, we are a technology company. We do in-house backends for top-tier, top-grossing games, and that's where I get today's learnings that I want to share. So you and me, let's found a game studio right now. And being clever people as we are, we probably think about time to market a lot, right? We want to validate our whole business. That's kind of the big point. And if we need to understand the context as well. If you can justify today's business, you need a lot of data, right? Discovery is, and I'm going to be crude, absolute shit, right? At the moment, you can't trust the stores. You need to do your own marketing. And since ads are an auction place, we need to be able to be paying more than our fellow competitors on the side. And unfortunately, they have established businesses with live games with very deep pockets, so we need a lot of confidence to really enter that game. And that's our dilemma, right? So our founding team needs to be amazingly good at solving this problem, and that historically has meant, let's find that hit game that's worth investing in, and let's build a small team that's super focused on solving that problem. So number one, we're gonna be focused on, do the core gameplay. We wanna get to soft launch to get the data, so we need analytics. Let's build a thing that focuses on those three and basically do it as ASAP as possible, right? Skip all the fluff and just get this out, get to data, and see if it's worth investing in. And this is a good plan. This is how the past 10 years of companies have been built. But there's a problem with it. That's not all that obvious. So when you build a team like this, and my past companies are a very good example, you have this highly performing unit that has just amazing productivity all the way to, let's call it global launch, that point where you need to scale your company. And you know that experience when it just kind of fizzles out, and not just fizzles out, but your productivity just absolutely through the floor, down into the basement. And what that feels like is that the team that was shipping features left and right suddenly takes, instead of weeks, it takes months to do iterations on the game. Or it just takes forever to get anything done, even though everybody's kind of doing something all the time, because you're kind of responding to situations rather than working in the situation. And that moment is really curious to me. Why does it happen? And there's roughly four things, four major things that are kind of affecting this here, where number one, the number of players goes up. Duh. You start getting millions, tens of millions of players in. That's complexity right there. And at the same time, you need to keep developing the game to get to feature parity, to get to the metrics that you need to be able to be paying for those ads. So your game's complexity explodes, while at the same time, to meet these things, you're hiring like mad to be able to handle all of this. So your operational complexity goes up. And at the same time, suddenly you're a revenue-generating business. So you have real customers spending real money, and you have responsibilities out of that, right? All of these four things we need to be able to handle. If any one of them fails, then we can't scale our operation. We're physically unable to do it. Now, each one of these is quite a big topic that I'd love to spend the whole session on. But I'm just gonna pick out the first two, and let's go a little bit deeper on what we might be able to. What does it look like, and what might we be able to do about this? So, obviously, I have a technology background, so the first point is kind of easiest to me. For example, when you end up making this, I'm not calling it a prototype, but this first game that you push out for data, when you hyper-focus on just doing that, you can cut a lot of corners, and it's a good idea to do so, right? Like, for example, that is an actual high-level graph of what a backend system might look like for a simple game. And it's brilliant, it works, until you pour a lot of players on it, because then like not all technology is built to handle scale. For example, when you have a lot of people coming in, then the database is usually the first one to go. And incidentally, they are also the most difficult technology to scale, like in human history. It's a very difficult thing to do. So we are still smart. We will be able to handle this situation given enough time. But then our whole tech team is focused on solving this scalability problem instead of, for example, building more features to the game. So it takes our focus away, which is the main problem here. At the same time as, remember that game complexity shooting up? The actual problem is that pre-launch, again, we have some things we need and everything else is kind of nice to have. But the moment we start hitting that scale, suddenly, if we look at the middle column of a hit game, it has things like localization, over-the-air updates, live ops tools, a cheat-proof economy. These are not necessary for the first kind of retention numbers, but they're absolutely critical today to make something that is able to sustain a player's interest for years. So if you want to be competitive on those ads, right, then you probably need all of this stuff just to get your LTV up. So suddenly that simple thing that we did in the beginning is no longer, you can't do all of this. And that's even before we look at the top crossing box, which is like well ahead in the future. So now if we at this point, we're gonna stop and think about it. We look at the feature list and then we get out of our napkins and start doodling, right, okay. Again, taking the technology angle, what do we need to build that is able to roughly fulfill this design spec? Okay, it's not too bad. And I'll race through it quickly. If you're interested, take a picture. But it goes something like this. We have lots of players coming in, and there's millions and millions of them, so we need load balancers. And then those load balancers take players toward the game logic nodes that run the cheat-proof economy on the servers. And single-player logic is very different to multiplayer logic, so we need multiplayer nodes. And somebody mentioned over-the-air updates, so we need a CDN to deliver our content. And all of these systems need to talk to services like in-app purchase validation and notifications. So, okay, let's build that. We need to persist it, so databases, and shard them so that they can scale from the beginning. And all of this is kind of a game server now. Let's call it a cluster. And the moment I mention a cluster, that means we need tools to manage the cluster itself. We need tools to manage the managing of the cluster, because this is how it works, automation pipelines and so on. And now we need to know what's happening inside the cluster. That's called monitoring. And we need to know what's happening with the game that's running in our cluster. That's called logging. And we need to know how the player experience is within the game. That's called game analytics. And did somebody mention live ops? So let's start building some admin dashboards. And so on. That's where I run out of slide space. And all of that is absolutely doable. We're smart. We know how this gets built. And there's more to it. There's always more to it. Backup, security, automation, all that. But the problem is that we're in the firefighting mode with a system that's very different. Objectively, there's no overlap between these two slides, right? So the transition from this sort of crisis mode into a mode where we have what we need to build what we need, that is a very, very difficult thing to do. And that's why operating games live is so slow. And so the one message, if anything, my favorite quote in the industry is that hope is not a plan. It never was. Like, it doesn't work. You can't just figure it out later. That thinking about this right now is about 100 times cheaper in real numbers than reacting to it and taking months and months and months later. So let's right now, us, think about this a little bit. There's roughly 3 things you could do immediately. When you go back home, we could take a couple of hard discussions and maybe double check ourselves and maybe save a lot of time. Number 1, consider now, but implement later. You don't have to start coding as of this second. We only need to think about that spec of what we need to do and then make sure that whatever we're building is able to accommodate the full spec once that becomes relevant, so that we can later on adopt complex things. And specifically, what we've learned from our customers is that the most highest ROI, the time well spent aspect of this, is in your over-the-air update pipelines as a developer. To me, this was kind of surprising. It's not obvious to me at all. But basically what that means is that if you early on put in the time to figure out how you're going to update your game live, then that actually gives you a huge amount of momentum as you're racing towards global launch, and then immediately afterwards that you get to tune your economy easily. And that's very a game-specific thing. There's no magic bullet to that, but that's like if you're going to focus on one thing, maybe make it that. And then the third thing is that generally speaking, as we're starting to build this thing, whatever services you're using or how you're building it, let's try to make it in a way that we can change our mind later, right? Modular design and all that. I'll use a simple analogy, but let's make sure that you can switch your database later on. Let's not hard code that in, but make it in a way that we can swap technical blocks in and out, because you will need to be able to do that later. So let's make it easier for ourselves. And because all of this is quite hand-wavy, I'm going to pick one example and go deep on it, and I'll just at random pick my favorite, which is the over-the-air data pipelines, because that's something I happen to be working with quite a lot. And this gets technical, but bear with me. So typically, when you make a game, you do something like, I don't know, I'm a programmer, let's just hard code everything into the game, press play, test it, that's the fastest thing. And nobody does this at scale. It's a very bad idea at scale, of course, because distributing builds is slow. It's not a design tool, right? Only programmers know how to program. That's not a thing you can give to a designer. And especially in a bigger team, there's just no migration out of this. Ask anybody who's had to implement localization to a game that hasn't been designed for localization. That is a dark place in a programmer's heart, that migration. And okay, so obviously you want to do something else. Most people end up doing something like, hey, let's take something like JSON files, which is like a text file, chuck those on a web server, download it when the app starts, and ta-da, you've got over-the-air updates, which is good. It works. And upsides, technology is here since the 90s. It's pretty good. It's very easy to do. But then there's subtle downsides that still make it completely unworkable, that are maybe less obvious. For example, text-based files, very slow to parse on old mobile devices, to the point where in real life we've seen games crash on the loading screen because it takes too long and the process has to be terminated to open a text file when it gets too big. And these JSON files and so on, they're still difficult for non-technical people. So what was the point again? To make it easier for designers to work with this stuff? Mission failed. And also it doesn't really answer any of the truly hard questions about this stuff, which is versioning, release management, A/B testing, rollbacks, partial updates of the data, and so on. And that would be okay, but it's not. We live and die based off of our ability to grow the game. And if we can't, then as somebody from Supercell said, why did you put in the work without putting in the work? Details matter. Let's figure this out. So, okay, what might a sort of complete solution look like? Well, for example, at Metaplay, we ended up doing something where you essentially have a designer tool, let's call it spreadsheets, where you define your economy. And then, since you can't trust humans, we have a step that basically downloads, optimizes, and validates all of the designs before it gets released. Then we archive and do sort of release management on the game server itself, so that you can kind of fall back to previous working versions of the configs and so on. And then we deliver automatic updates and keep them in sync on the server and the client and all that. So that's sort of a system, very good. It's sort of what you need at the end of the day, high performance, and we can binary optimize the assets and all that. But the downside is that what I just said kind of sounds like work. I don't like work. We don't have time for that, right? Because we still operate on the same early problem space where we don't have any time, we need to get to market quickly. I don't want to start setting up servers and build pipelines and so on. Like, Teemu, what the hell? So, if we think back to the three life hacks, the first one was think about it now, implement it later. So how about, with this in mind, we just do something where we stub out the game config upload, download process and hard code in a default. So that means that we're back into the change code, press play, and just like run the game as we wanted in the beginning. But now when we eventually absolutely need to introduce the complexity, we're now prepared to slot it in instead of refactoring the whole system from the ground up, right? And now we have the flexibility to do it when we need to do it, if we need to do it, without having to spend months and months in the beginning to do a setup. So do now. It's a future-proof thing that doesn't take a lot of time. And the point of this very concrete, let's talk about the details example is just this like one idea that doing stuff in a future-proof way doesn't mean that you have to take forever doing it, right? Taking smart choices doesn't take a lot of time. We just need to think about it for a while. And of course, then all of this, it can be a little bit like negative and doom and gloom, but I really want to convey the idea that victory is possible. It is possible to make games and structure your team in a way that when you need to start scaling, whether it's on the ad side or like the app side of it, we can kind of have the right tools in place, have the right kind of team in place. And the only thing we need to do is plan for it. It doesn't happen by accident. Hope is not a plan when it comes to scaling games. So, in a very practical sense, again, those are my three takeaways that have nothing to do with technology or game genre. You can do it, hopefully, whatever you're working on. But of course, if this is something that you're interested in, good news. We've made our technology free on the website to try, source code and everything. Go download it. We've spent 5 years working on all of that stuff. Go and steal it. And give me feedback. I'm interested. We also have a mixer on Wednesday. You're welcome to come by and have a beer on us. And come talk to me. Let me know what you're working on. I'm interested in that. So, thank you. We might have time for a question or two, but otherwise, enjoy GDC. And thanks for stopping by.